Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a physical overview and a first look at the brand new Canon EOS 6D Mark II. Now, I've asked B&H Photo to send me a copy here in kit with the 24-105 f4 LIS Mark II, and so I actually haven't previously reviewed this lens, and obviously it's a pretty essential one for a lot of photographers and one that comes in kit with a number of Canon's full frame bodies. And so anyway, I'll be doing a review of that at the same time. And so I know that a lot of you have a number of different aspects of the actual sensor performance that you'll want me to cover. I also recognize that nobody seems to be quite as good as Canon as stirring up controversy. And it seems like with every one of their new major camera releases, there is a lot of controversy over features that photographers feel like should be there but aren't. And for example, last year, as I began coverage of the 5D Mark IV, I was kind of running contrary to the swirl of opinion here on YouTube, because a lot of photographers were really ticked about different aspects of the way that Canon executed the vision. And I'm not trying to go back and to say that Canon made all the right decisions there, but I was trying to calm people's expectations and saying that at the end of the day, I think you're going to find that the 5D Mark IV is an exceptional camera. And I stand by that. I've been using one for about a year now at this point, and I really like the camera. Now, I'm going into the 6D Mark II with a completely open mind. I started off with the EOS 6D. I actually used a couple bodies as my primary cameras for years, and I still own an original 6D that I primarily use kitted out with an EGS focus screen for doing manual focus SLR lens reviews. And so I'm interested in the 6D Mark II, potentially even on a personal level. But I am going into this with zero expectations, either good or bad. What we're going to do today is we're going to take a really close look at what has changed here in the physical design of this camera and what hasn't. Let's jump in, let's take a closer look. So we're going to take a little bit closer look at the overall build and design of the brand new Canon EOS 6D Mark II. So quickly here, I'm just going to show you it with the kit lens, well, one of the kit lenses, and that's the new 24-105 millimeter f4 LIS lens. And so this gives you an idea of how it looks with that lens attached, and I'll be giving you a closer look and review of the lens itself, which I hadn't reviewed previously. But right now we're going to focus on looking at the camera itself. Now, for comparison purposes, I've brought a couple of cameras here that this new camera borrows from. And so one of those, of course, is the original EOS 6D, which of course is full frame and the first generation of what this new camera has evolved to. And then also, of course, it borrows somewhat also from the 80D in terms of the focus system and in terms of the articulating screen and a few of the actual layouts. And so we're going to take a look at all of these things, and I'll keep the original 6Ds back here so we can look at that as we compare this new one. Now, a few things to note, and obviously in terms of the actual button layout, it is essentially identical. There's one kind of distinction here, and that is that the thumb ridge here is a little bit more pronounced on the 6D Mark II, which is a nice feature. The grip feels really good there, and you can see that there's a little bit more space here between the AF on button and then the two that are up on this ridge here. And so that just gives you a little bit easier area of trying to distinguish, and frankly on the original 6D I did find it hard with my eye up against the viewfinder to actually kind of distinguish between these three buttons, and that's much clearer here. They're all on a different kind of level or plane here, and so lower and then at the top and then a little bit more recessed, and so it is easy to physically feel a distance between all three buttons. So that's certainly a nice welcome improvement there. Now, to make room for the articulating screen, in particular, you know, being able to get a kind of a fingernail in there to raise that up, there has been a little bit of a redesign to the circular wheel here, and we'll find that in terms of the size and shape, it's a little bit closer to that of the 80D than it is from the original 6D, which this occupies a little bit more space. It's a little bit larger. Beyond that also, there is a kind of a different texture pattern It's got more of a kind of a triangular pattern built into there, and so a little bit more grip, and it moves nice and easily. And in terms of the rocking on this, of course, Canon does a good job with that, and so all of this feels good to my thumb. One thing, of course, if you're coming from a 5D series or even a 7D series, that you're going to miss is the thumbstick for making adjustments. Now, Canon has helped to accommodate for some of those things by including its excellent touchscreen here. And beyond a touchscreen, a very welcome feature in my mind is this articulating screen. And so Canon calls this a vari-angle screen, but it is designed, and Canon does a great job in executing these. And so between the ability to have a touch screen and of course the ability to put this screen in pretty much whatever position you want, and a huge advantage to the fully articulating screen compared to those that just tilt is that if you're shooting in a portrait orientation, it allows you to set the screen down in a visible way, whereas a tilting screen is really no help at all in that orientation. And so I find these screens to be very useful. Some people have been concerned about durability. I've owned a 60D, I've owned a 70D, I've owned an 80D, and with all of those, I've had zero issues, and so that represents years of usage. And you know, for example, this 80D, no problem at all. In fact, here's a crazy story. When I owned one of my 5D Mark IIs, that at one point I was walking along carrying it through the forest, and it was in a harness position with a lens attached. It's like this. Literally an acorn fell out of a tree, hit the screen, and shattered it. And so this screen, for one thing, advantages that if I'd been able to carry it like that, it would of course kept that from shattering that. So anyway, that's an interesting aspect. Moving on to the bottom of the camera, there's more similarities than differences here, including battery door, which feels roughly similar. I do find that the 6D Mark II is a little bit lighter, and thus it feels, although there is the metals that are part of it, and in fact the weather sealing is improved on it, it actually feels, I would say, just a hair cheaper feeling to me than what the original 6D did, and that's just more of a perception. It's not a reality, I don't think. In terms of what's different here, the battery door houses a LP E6N battery, which by the way is backwards compatible with the same battery that Canon uses in a lot of other things. I find that useful because I share batteries across a number of different cameras. And so not a lot changed on the bottom. In terms of anything else that has changed here from the rear view, the viewfinder itself it's more akin to that on the 80D, except for the fact that here this is a full frame coverage and it's moved up from 97% to 98% on the new 6D Mark II. On this side here is a place where a lot of people's disappointments are going to come. There's still a single SD card slot, just like the original 6D, and basically we have not advanced at all in terms of the support, in terms of memory there, and so obviously Canon is determined for the purpose of this camera that this is enough, and they've chosen to continue to distinguish the 6D and the 5D lines with the single card slot, and I know that that is a big disappointment for many, and for others it will be a deal breaker. Looking at the top of the two cameras, you'll see that they are virtually identical. The layout is pretty much the same. There is one difference, and that is up here. There is the additional button for selecting the different kinds of approach to zoning for the autofocus. And so you can choose single point, you can choose zones, whereas on the original 6D with a more simplistic autofocus system, there were no zones to access, and so you just access single points. And so in that sense, from the top viewpoint, that button is similar to that which is on the 80D. However, the actual layout of these 5 buttons here is the same as the original 6D. Also similar is the mode dial here. It has all the exact same different types of modes. There is a little bit of an improvement to the feel of this mode dial. Again, just a little bit more of a kind of a diamond texture pattern that's there, and a little bit of it's kind of a soft touch material on the rubberized, which is nice. Moving on to this side, there are a little bit of changes, and I think some positive ones here. For one thing, the mic access port is moved up higher up on the camera body, which is a more advantageous position if you're wanting to actually use an external mic. It puts it into an easier place to access as a filmmaker. This rotates down, and so it's not going to be in the way here, whereas those that were trying to use an external mic on this, the original 6D, it was a little bit more of a pain. It's a bigger door that gets in the way, and of course the mic port is all the way down at the bottom. Now you'll notice that the remote access or remote trigger port was at the top of this. It's now moved, like the 5D series, to the front of the camera, and you can see that it's accessible there. And I think that this is a positive move, just frees up a little bit more space and allows for a more logical positioning of the mic. The other thing that has changed here is that whereas the original 6D just had two kind of long flaps here covering USB 2.0 and then HDMI, mini HDMI out, the same things are here. It's just a little bit better of a access port, but we still have the USB 2.0 standard, which once again Canon has determined that the transfer rate is fine for this, unlike say the 5D Mark IV and HDMI out mini ports there. So nothing has really changed inside this compartment. You'll see the NFC symbol here, and so this camera, it does include NFC support, and along with a Bluetooth standard that's been added to the Wi-Fi. And yes, some people had wondered if there is GPS here. Yes, there still is GPS, and thankfully it is a little bit more complex GPS options, more like the 5D Mark IV, and so you do now have an option of setting it in a mode where GPS turns off with the camera, and so there's less of a battery drain, whereas the original 6D, it was either on or off. And so if it was left on, it would drain the battery down, and after a few days, even if you were doing nothing, it would pretty much kill the battery life. Looking at the front of the camera, of course this is a full frame sensor, and in terms of the actual positioning, other than that access port on the front for remote trigger release, everything is pretty much the same. Depth of field button is still right down here, and very similar lens mount release there. And so in that sense, there's more similar than different. The overall profiles and heights of the camera are very similar. Just a few millimeters taller for the new 6D Mark II. In hand, it feels extremely familiar, and if anything, you know, Canon does a great job with grips, and it feels really, really good in the hand. And so it's quite a light camera body now, only 670 or so grams, and so they've done a great job with packing a lot of features, and of course a brand new 26.2 megapixel full frame sensor, 35 millimeter sensor inside there, and of course I will be looking much closer at the performance of this and checking out the dynamic range and how it performs at high ISO settings, and just taking a lot of pictures with the camera and seeing what we get out of it. So stay tuned. So as you can see, kind of the really big feature that has changed above all else when it comes to the physical design is the addition of the articulating screen, or what Canon calls a vari-angle LCD screen. This, I think, is a huge, huge addition. And I've really enjoyed it on the 60, 70, and 80D series, and I think there's a reason why Canon is incorporating it more and more. And I think that it's great that there is now a full-frame Canon body that does have the LCD screen for those that really favor that. As we move ahead, yes, I'm going to be looking at things like the dynamic range of the camera, and that's kind of one of the points of controversy. And no, I'm not going to be looking at the 4K because there is no 4K, and that's another issue. And as I pointed out, there still is just a single SD slot, and so no room for more either advanced card systems or for dual slots. Obviously, those are things that will make it into the final review. But beyond the stuff that everybody knows about, I also want to take a look at how good is the camera in day-to-day use? How good is the autofocus system? That is borrowed in many ways from the 80D, but as a lot of people have noted that on a full frame, it doesn't cover nearly as much of the actual image as what it does on the 80D. So we'll look at that, we'll see how it actually performs and whether you can put wide-angle lenses like, say, the 35mm f1.4L Mark II and lenses like that on there and get good results on the outer focus points, which was a bit of a downside with lenses or with the 6D body itself. So we'll look at all those things. Don't worry, a lot more coverage is yet to come. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you look in the description down below, I've got an image gallery started there, some photos of this new bad boy, and then of course a number of images taken with the camera, both with the kit lens, and I'll have a specific gallery for that, but then also with, you know, a wide variety of other lenses that I either have in my kit or happen to be passing through my hands at the same time as the 6D Mark II. If you haven't already, you can become one of my patrons, and I'll throw links to my Patreon account. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.